Good evening, everyone. It's 7 o'clock, and I'd like to call together school committee meeting, January 12th, 2023. And if you would start by rising with me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. We have a consent agenda posted, as well as minutes included in the packet from our December 15th, 2022 meeting, as well as oath to bills and payroll. I'd like to accept a motion to accept those as posted.
So moved.
Motion made by Mr. Austin, seconded by Mr. Marias. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All set. Thank you. This is our first opportunity for interested citizens. So if there's anybody present or online that would like to speak before the school committee, make a brief pause to see if that's the case.
We don't have any online. Sure.
Okay, great. All right. Next, we'll move on to a recognition portion of the meeting. We'll hear from our student representative, John Feltus.
Hello, my name is John Feltus. I'm the student representative for Littleton Schools, and I have some updates to give. At the Shaker Lane last Thursday, Shaker Lane had a school-wide presentation on electrical safety, promoted through the Littleton Water Department. Students went home with electrical safety coloring and activity books to share with their families. Shaker Lane looks forward to holding their virtual Shakey's story time next Friday evening. Students will have the opportunity to log on and have stories read to them by a number of staff members. They hope to see many students take advantage of this fun event. Russell Street students had an excellent transition back to school after the break. They started their WIN electives on Wednesday. Fifth graders had Battlefield Day on Friday, and they look forward to an upcoming band concert in early February. At the middle school, map testing begins on January 26th. And at the high school, on the 17th, the acting for the stage class will perform Almost / Out of Town. And the intro to theater class will be performing Sure Thing. And this will start at 7 p.m. From the 23rd to the 27th, the Great Kindness Challenge will happen at the high school. And on the 27th, the semi-formal dance will be held in the Littleton cafeteria starting at 6 p.m. On the 28th, the drama club will be doing the Play in the Day Festival at 8 p.m. Where they plan to perform 3 to 4 plays that they all work on in that one day.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Superintendent Clenchey, anything to add?
Yeah, just one thing. On Tuesday evening, our school district and CPAC hosted a workshop with the topic Practical Strategies to Alleviate Anxiety and Reduce Challenging Behaviors. We had members of our clinical team out present. We had about 40 individuals out, including parents and some staff. It was a very worthwhile presentation and discussion. The parents that were there greatly appreciated the dialogue that we had, and I left feeling really good about the evening. I know Brad was there as well, and I'd like to thank everybody that was involved in putting that together. It was a good amount of work, but it was certainly worth it when we saw the interactions that evening.
Can I echo that real quickly? It was wonderful. It was just wonderful. It was great to see the parents there. The presentations were incredibly thoughtful and well prepared. The dialogue among the staff, it was great to see how well they work together. The resources, I've stolen some that I can use in my own methods classes, and that they're going to make available, I think, to parents. District, it was a great thing, and really appreciate CPAC pushing for it, and Lynn Snow and the professionals for putting it on. It was very, very good.
Good. I heard the same. So excellent.
That's it.
Okay. Move on to our presentation portion of the evening. So we have MCAS update. So I'll read it as presented, but we'll take it in any order you both want. Director of Teaching and Learning, Elizabeth Steele, and principals John Harrington, Jason Everhart, and Cheryl Temple will give an update on the 2022 MCAS scores or results. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so as Chairman just said, we are here to share the results from the 2022 MCAS. And so for tonight's presentation, we have it broken into 4 different parts. And so I'm here to begin with pertinent information with regards to the MCAS of 2022. And then we'll have each school do a section with their own results, their own set of data, with their own impressions of that data, and then also next steps after looking at that data. And so we ask that tonight to be just a little bit more structured, that we will ask you to hold your questions until the end of each school section. So we'll give a pause after each school has presented, and then a good time for just kind of a breaking up and allowing you to ask any questions or make any comments before we move on to the next school. All right, so as we state with any and all presentations that include student data, remember that this is one piece of information for our students. It's important to acknowledge this yet again, because we know, especially in this day and age, our students are so much more than one piece of data. And so we take this piece and we put it together with all the other pieces that we know in order to look at our students holistically. So to keep that in mind as we go through this. This year, DESE partnered with an organization called Open Architects to provide an interactive dashboard for our MCAS data. We appreciate DESE partnering with Open Architects, allowing us to use this platform to really dive in and analyze the MCAS data in this way. And so all charts and screenshots that you see this evening were pulled from the Open Architects platform. So some pertinent information. We felt like it was important to provide some contextual overview of MCAS over the past few years. And so this table that is here, produced by DESE, allows us to do just that. So you see that 2022 was the first full MCAS administration for grades 3 through 8 since 2019. So it has been a couple of years since they have had a full administration. Our grade students in 2022 had not taken an MCAS ELA or math test since 2019. So something else to keep in mind. And that was when we were in grade 7. So when we look at the chart there, we see the varied test administrations going from 2019 to full test administration to no test being administered to half a test, and then back to full test administration. So just to quickly remind ourselves, because I know the past few years, while they have each been unique in their own way, at times can blend a little bit together. So 2019 was right before pre-pandemic. 2020 was, we were gearing up for MCAS season, and then March 13th came, schools closed, no tests were administered that year. In 2021, we came back, but that was the hybrid and remote version of our school year. And so we had that very unique schedule, and some students remained remote and did not enter any school building that school year. In 2022, everyone came back. There was no remote option, right? So everyone came back into the buildings, but there were still some mitigation strategies that included masking, that included distancing, that do at times have an impact on our instructional practices. So a couple of other pieces of pertinent information with regards to our 2022 MCAS data is that absenteeism is something to consider. And so when students were absent last year and the year before that, it tended to be a little bit longer absences than what we've seen in the past, where a student may have been sick for just a day or even 2. They were sicker for a longer period of time. So they were out of the classroom for a longer period of time. The 2022 MCAS, DESE has already stated that this is going to be the new benchmark of MCAS. So moving forward, we are taking this set of data that you are seeing tonight as our benchmark. So we will be comparing back to 2022. At the state level,
I'll stop, sorry.
no, do you want to jump in?
The previous benchmark was 2019, or was it?
Yeah, so 2019 would be the most recent benchmark because we can't use the 20 or 21 due to varied test administrations. And now because of,
No, sorry, I'm sorry.
it's okay. Well, I'm not technically going over school data, so fair game, that's fine. So the 2021, right, because of varied test administrations can't be used. And then also, I mean, DESE acknowledges, right, we have gone through a pandemic, and so we need to consider where we are now and look forward. And so that's the mindset that at the moment that they have.
But when they compared the previous year, we have the plus minus for each, that's to 2019, or that's to?
So I'm gonna explain that. Really good question. Yeah, no, that's a great, so it's a little bit unique. So achievement, we can compare with a grain of salt, to 2021. Again, I say with a grain of salt, especially in grade 3 to 8, because it was half an assessment versus 22 was a full assessment. So we just need to, that's where that grain of salt comes in. Student growth percentile, we actually can't compare at all because they use different methodologies. And so when we do any comparison with student growth, we would have to go back to 2019. However, and on the screenshots, it does say to previous year. And so the information is there, it is on the screen because the data is there, right? It can be pulled and it can be looked at, but this is why context to data is so important. And so you can't actually compare previous year student growth percentile from 21 to 22 due to DESE using a different methodology.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. So at the state level, there were some general observations, and we in Littleton actually were able to see, again, generally these observations. And so in the 2022 MCAS, they showed mixed results compared with 2021. Again, we're comparing performance, right? So achievement level here. Overall, math scores increased. ELA actually scores declined a little bit. Science scores increased slightly. And they were able to observe just an impact of lower writing scores. And so you might hear that as the schools are presenting. And so was seen at the state level as well. Almost lastly, the STE MCAS at the high school was next gen this past year. That is the final assessment to be pushed into next gen. So now all of our MCAS assessments are next gen. And then lastly, talking to the comparisons. So you are going to see several comparisons. We are going to make comparisons. It's innate when we look at testing to start doing some comparisons, right? A couple of notes about making comparisons though. As I said, we can't compare our student growth percentile, which we will use SGP. Whenever you hear SGP tonight, SGP, it means student growth percentile, between 21 and 22. Due to the different methodologies that DESE used to come up with this information. Again, you're going to see it on the screen because it is there, it is out there, but that is just, it's not an accurate comparison. We do strongly value looking at the SGP though, right? Because that is how we are able to tell if students are growing, if they are learning. And so we do put emphasis on looking at that SGP. It's just that we can't compare it to last year SGP. And like math growth, right? We look at the growth that is happening, and overall we are seeing growth in our students. And so it's important to take note of that.
And the SGP is in the aggregate, or we also have individual students?
Just ag. Well, we have both.
Right, but these numbers are cool. Okay,
Yes,
they're
exactly. Yeah, so these are all exactly cohort size. And then lastly, as I just mentioned previously, we can compare the achievement and the performance, right, data, but consider it with a grain of salt, particularly in grades 3 through 8, because last year was a half of a test administration and the 22 was a full test administration. And then finally, when we do that comparison year to year, we're looking at the same grade level. Just remember that it's different cohorts, and being a small district, each cohort can have its very own unique personality or characteristics with them. And so just another piece of when we're looking at data to keep in mind. With all of that, if there are any other questions for me about this pertinent information, I'm happy to answer them.
Any questions about next generation MCAS exams as opposed to the old MCAS?
I did have that question, but I assumed that is it just computer based? Is that or
Well, no, it's a whole restructuring of the exam. When they were introducing it, they were really upping the expectations with the new MCAS, next generation MCAS.
Exactly, and upping the standards. So they are according to the new standards that are out. And so what's interesting that you'll hear is that in high school, Keith might be speaking about this. So I don't want to, jump too far into it. But we might have students, because they're recalibrating the exam from a legacy to the next gen and the scores. And so for a couple of years, we have a transition period where some students might technically fall into that partially meeting category, but they actually meet their competency determination and are able to receive a graduation credit.
That was be my last question.
Yeah.
In all this, how does this relate to our new graduation requirements?
Yeah, exactly. So it's incremental increases that are happening at the moment. Same for a couple more years. and then it'll jump, and then we'll see again. Jesse has put some years on it, and we'll have to take a step back, re-examine again, and then they might change their scoring at that point.
Just so we're better prepared when everyone gives different,
Sure.
the student growth percentile, the SGP, could you just go over that again, what that exactly is, so a better understanding of what these scores mean?
Yeah, so the student growth percentile is the amount that a student has grown, but it's in the percentile, right? And so if a student is compared to cohort, and so if a student is able to demonstrate a particular amount of growth within a certain, where they fall, it's that percentile. So they're then, for example, we see a number of 54.
55, whatever,
Or,
yeah.
but yeah, right. So then that cohort is achieving at 54. If say there's 100, right? They're achieving at higher than 54 of their peers in that cohort.
Oh, okay.
That
Yeah,
makes
there are ranges of average growth, exemplary growth, moderate growth, and low growth, depending on the points.
So if you see,
The growth is, I guess it's the G part that's confusing to me, because I understand what percentile is, like 54. If I line 100 cohorts up and we're 54, we know that, you know, that's where we fall on the line in terms of we're doing better than these and worse than those.
mhm,
But the growth is compared to what? The 10th,
they're academic peers.
their academic peers, okay,
Yes. So it's the cohort model,
last time,
right?
okay.
And so that's why we have to go, because Jesse had momentarily
Mhm.
changed that cohort model, and they've gone back to the cohort, which, thank you, cohort academic.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks.
All right, and I'll pass it over to Keith, who is going to present the high school.
Thank you, Beth. Good evening.
Good evening.
Keith Kamal, Assistant Principal High School. And I'm here to talk about the high school MCAS results from this past spring. As Beth talked about, the graphic you see here on the right side of the screen is from that Open Architect software that we used this year. It's a little bit different looking than what we presented before when we kind of done our own thing or used the DESI website to populate some of these graphics. But this shows the past 3 years, and at the high school, it's a little bit different from what Beth was talking about with the comparison to previous test administrations. At the high school, we did have a typical test administration last year, 2021, as well as 2019. Obviously, we didn't have the half test because of the graduation requirements. And so it's a little bit different for us that we do have 3 relatively solid years of data that are relatively comparable. So for ELA grade 10, we see the overall percent of proficiency, which is at meeting expectations or exceeding expectations, with the 85% for the total grade, which is a 1% increase from the previous year. And as you can see there, it's 44% above what the state performed at in terms of the grade 10 ELA. Our student growth was at 55.1, which does fall in that typical growth range. I guess the band of typical growth is from 40 to 59. And so at 55.1, we're kind of the middle, the higher end of the typical growth for all of our sophomores, or this current junior class, last year's sophomores. Another thing to note for ELA, we did look at our student disabilities and how they performed on the various tests. We see that our students with disabilities scored 58% at meeting expectations or exceeding expectations. Is lower compared to the previous year. But as Beth mentioned, sometimes when you're looking at very small cohort sizes, a difference of 1 or 2 students can be viewed as a higher percentage, obviously. So keep that in mind as we look at the performance of the students with the disabilities because of the small cohort size. Their growth for those students who are on IEPs and 504s was 50.1, which does fall again within that solid typical growth bandwidth for ELA.
Hard to realize that the IEP 504 cohorts in high school are fairly small.
Yep. And one thing that is interesting is that this Open Architect software does combine students with IEPs and 504s into one category, whereas on the DESI website, when they say student disabilities, are only talking about students with IEPs, not necessarily 504s. So in this software, it is different. So numbers may look a little bit different on our presentation tonight than on the DESI website, but that's why. It's because we're using the Open Architect software, which includes students with disabilities who are on 504s as well as on IEPs. So that is our ELA numbers. And another thing to keep in mind is that the requirement for high school is that you must be at least partially meeting expectations in order to graduate. So I know Beth was mentioning the variation between students who didn't meet expectations with being able to earn their competency determination. And so that's where that lies, that it must be partially meeting or above. So on this graphic, the light gray, the light blue, and the dark blue.
They're still meeting graduation requirements.
Yes, we do have to implement an EPP, an education proficiency plan for students who are partially meeting expectations. So we have to work with guidance, and in the case of a student with an IEP or 504, their liaison or whoever else to develop a plan to help them demonstrate proficiency on the certain standards. So if a student is partially being proficiency in English, we may look at what types of structures we put in place to support to help that student demonstrate proficiency in English or in math or whatever it is. So that's part of the graduation requirement. In math, for this past spring, again, our students were meeting or exceeding expectations, the percent proficient at 77.7%, which is a little bit of a dip compared to the previous performance. But again, we are solidly above the state average, 39% above the state average. Our SGP, again, 57.5, solidly in that typical growth range. Better growth than previous cohorts. The student IEPs and 504s, we're meeting or exceeding expectations at 40%, which is a little bit lower. And if you notice on the graphic, the darker gray, there says for 4% we're not meeting expectations. This is an example where we did have students who didn't meet the expectation score, but because of the adjustment to the scoring due to the variability in the test administration, we had students who didn't meet expectations but will receive their competency determination because of different scoring. So even though it says 4% not meeting, it's actually closer to maybe 1% or 2% that are actually not meeting and don't require an EPP or not to retake the test. We've already had the retake administration in November for students who didn't pass in the spring. We haven't got those scores back yet, but that was in November, and we have the biology one coming up in February, the retake. So that's kind of on the horizon for us. So there's math. In biology, it looks a little bit different, primarily because this is the first year of the next gen test. And so there is no comparison because it's a completely different test, next gen versus the legacy test. Another thing to note, you asked about the differences between the next gen and the legacy, particularly in English, the structure of the test and the structure of the questions, especially the open response questions, changed. Like in the old legacy test, there was a standalone long response, composition on the first day of the test. That has gone away with the next gen testing, and it's more of shorter response. There's still open response in the test itself, but it's just a different structure. So there are different styles of writing that are expected with the new test, and so that's the one bigger difference. And with science, for example, being the first year of the new test, there were more open response type questions, application type questions, not just pure recall type things. But we performed very solidly again on the ninth grade biology. 85% of our students were either meeting or exceeding expectations. Again, well above the state average. Our student IEPs and 504s, 54% of them were meeting or exceeding expectations. And, pretty much the rest were in that partially meeting category. I think we have a couple of kids who have to take the test in February. And we also have students taking the test in February who are new to us. We have a handful of students who are new to us as juniors, who have been in either private schools or in other states who've never taken the test, but they also take the retake because the requirement is still in place for them as well. So they'll be taking the retake as well. So that's coming up. So some overall impressions in math, from the number of, actually real quickly, of the 77.7% of students who are either meeting or exceeding, 30% of those were exceeding expectations. So in that highest category of math achievement, which is higher than 2019, is higher than 2021. So our exceeding expectations category was higher. We had more students do very, very well in the test. Again, just an overall impression that 85% of our students are meeting or exceeding expectations in both English and science. So it's very solid performance for our students. 56% scored advanced in science using the legacy MCAS scale, which is the difference in scaling, and our growth is solid. Oftentimes, when we have a school that's performs very well, it's harder to see higher numbers of growth, because if you consistently score high, it's harder to show growth. But we did have nice typical growth, and sometimes that's good to note alongside of the higher achievement. Some of the challenges that we are looking at with the MCAS data is how are we going to continue to assist students who didn't meet expectations, especially in that partially meeting category, who are eligible for graduation, but we have to be able to help them demonstrate proficiency. That's a pretty consistent challenge that we have with MCAS, is how do we make sure that all of the students who were partially meeting or not meeting, obviously we have to get the students who are not meeting expectations to meet expectations on a test, but even the ones who are partially meeting, how do we ensure that they are earning or achieving the same goals that we have for all of our students. Post-COVID, as Beth mentioned, the writing skills we've noticed a decline in some of the writing skills in our students. So how do we get back into the state we were before and equip our students with the tools to meet the different types of writing prompts and read different types of writing challenges that happen in real life, but also happen on the MCAS. Just overall kind of impressions that we have put an emphasis on earlier intervention with kids in 9th and 10th grade who are struggling academically, and just putting more structures in place through whether it's our student support teams or other structures in order to provide more academic support, but also like behavioral and attendance support, various types of things. So some next steps, you'll hear. I hit the wrong button. You'll hear more about this again from the middle school as well. We have very similar challenges in terms of emerging out of the pandemic, and how do we provide more structures and get back to the more typical structures of how school was done before everything shut down. And so how do we get back to a situation where we do see more typical student attendance and student behavior and that kind of stuff, and student performance will come along with that. And so we're continually looking at how do we address various situations and making any kind of adjustment as needed as we go along, whether it's instructional or behavioral support or whatever it is. The English teachers, as I mentioned before, are looking at what different types of prompts and rubrics and assessments they're using in their classes to mirror the types of things that kids will be asked on the MCAS, not just because it prepares them for the MCAS, but it prepares them for a variety of writing styles and situations in high school, post-high school, real life, whatever that may be. We are emphasizing that essays need to directly address the essay question. Oftentimes when students are answering open response questions on the MCAS or other types of assessments, they're just writing what they know or writing what they think they know and not specifically addressing what the question's asking. So really emphasizing that if the question asks for identify three things in terms of for supporting evidence. And so we're really working on that in the English classrooms to make sure that students are reading the questions and addressing each part of the question fully as they prepare their written statements. Math teachers are providing students more opportunity to review and practice MCAS type problems that they may have struggled on. We do have access to all the questions and all the student performance, like individual student performance, like you mentioned before. So we can look at areas that wider groups struggled with and kind of reemphasize those skills. They are rearranging some of the units in the CP geometry class in particular to make sure that all the concepts that are tested, appear to students before the test happens. And so it's important to make sure that we're aligning our curriculum with what's being assessed. Not teaching to the test per se, but making sure that students are prepared and ready to take the test, but having access to all the curriculum. And we're continuing to have students practice math on the computer. It is a computer-based test now. We have used a program called Alex for the past three years, I think it is. It's an adaptive program, and we have it for the high school, algebra, geometry, algebra 2, integrated algebra, and pre-calculus, I believe, primarily at the CP level. And it's a program where students have their own account and they can do assessment type modules. And then the computer program actually, figures out where they're strong, where they're weak, where they need more practice. So we've been using that for 3 years, and we've had some pretty good success with students accessing that computer-based program to improve their mathematical skills. And again, we're gonna follow up with students in this current senior class to make sure they're all set, but also the junior class who have the EPPs for math and ELA. They don't need them for science at this point, but English and math, the EPP, the educational proficiency plan is, again, those steps that we are putting in place to ensure that the students who are not fully meeting expectations are able to by the time they graduate. And that's how they gain their competency determination for graduation.
We say fully meeting expectations, you mean getting into the partially meeting?
No, getting into the meeting expectations. So the students who are in the partially meeting on the test
Mhm.
are the ones that we've developed the plans for. So
Those are the EPPs.
EPPs, exactly. And so what we have to be able to show is that they have demonstrated proficiency that can be done in a number of ways.
Mhm.
There is actually an EPP test that the state has developed over the years. We haven't used that in a number of years, but you can also use, unit assessments, summative type assessments for your math courses that students are enrolled in.
And so we have to show these things to the state for
We have to
individual
keep them on
students?
file. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we keep them on file, and then if they want to see them, they can ask for them, and we can show this is John's EPP. This is how he met each of the standards that he may have struggled with beforehand. So, sorry, John.
Good luck, John.
It's to me.
Yeah, exactly. Any other questions for me about the high school data?
So if someone's partially meeting
Mhm.
expectations, but they have the EPP and it's in the
Yep.
file, they have set, Littleton and the student have then satisfied the requirements for graduation.
Right.
Okay.
Yep, absolutely. So the EPP is just us as a district, or as a school in particular.
Then if you were not meeting,
Identifying, say, a particular student's area of struggle where they didn't do well on the math test, for example.
right,
And this is what we're gonna do to address those deficiencies.
sure.
And then,
So it's like a close enough score and with a little cropping, the
Yeah.
assumption is that you've closed the gap.
yeah, you demonstrate that you understand that content, and then if you were retested, you would be meeting expectations.
And in the event that you are not meeting expectations, there's no,
In the event that you're not
You
meeting
have to retest.
expectations, you have to retest.
Okay.
And there are multiple opportunities. So, a typical student takes as a sophomore. If
Mhm.
they don't pass, they can take it in November.
Sure.
If they don't pass November, they can take it in March, like early March.
Yeah.
And then they can take it again with the regular test administration, then the following November, following March, May, or in science's case, following February.
I'm gonna assume that the 10th grade class is like 110 kids or something.
121.
121. So we've got the cohort of the IEPs and the 504s. We only had about 58% meeting or exceeding. Do you know what percentage were partially meeting?
Yes,
And I'm also just, the other question is, how big is that cohort? Are we talking like 12?
27 students
27, okay.
total, I believe, or 26, 27 students for the students with disabilities. I can find that number. I got
Okay.
afterwards if you want the actual number.
But at the end of the day, it's very few, it's like 1% and then 4% that are not meeting, and that's over the entire population of the
Correct.
121.
Absolutely, yeah. The graphics here are for the whole class.
Yeah. Okay. Jen Gold's on Zoom too. Jen, any questions?
Nope, I'm good, thanks.
I do have one more question for you. So these EPPs, we've asked questions before about what the literacy screening about, to what extent parents are involved. If my student is in the partially meeting expectations and the school develops with that student the EPP,
Mhm.
are the parents notified? Are the parents involved, or is
It
it?
can be,
Okay.
yeah, it's not necessarily tied into, obviously, it's not every student who doesn't meet expectations is on an IEP
Right.
or 504, but similar to a 504 or IEP meeting, a parent could be involved in development of any kind of plan.
But they could be notified that
Yeah.
we're doing a little more
Yep.
to support your kid. Okay.
Yeah, so they get the notification from the state with the score itself, and then there's some information about EPPs in the packet as well.
I do have questions about the difference between the typical students and the students of 504s,
Okay.
IEPs, but those are more district wide because there seems to be a consistent pattern
Okay.
of a
Do
gap.
you want to wait till the end then?
Yeah, I'll wait to the end.
Okay.
But, I may come back to you.
Sure, absolutely. Other question? All right. Six.
Lynn Snell has a question.
Oh, what's the question?
No,
Hi, I don't have a question. I just wanted to emphasize that if a student was going to be obtaining or meeting their requirements through an EPP and we're on an IEP, that would be something that would be brought up and discussed at an IEP meeting.
Right.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that I mentioned that it wasn't just students with IEP to apply for it, that would have to have an EPP. Any student doesn't meet conditions.
Sure.
All right, seeing no more questions, I'll turn it over to Matt Levangie for the middle school data.
Thank you.
Met all my expectations.
I'm sure you did.
You see what the next.
So far,
you go.
so far, a couple months.
Hi, I'm Matt Levangie. I'm the assistant principal. Jason could not be here tonight, so you are stuck with me, but I will try to do my best.
Okay.
So looking right off at the sixth grade ELA, the SGP, or the student growth percentile, was 55 points, which fell into the typical range. 58% of our students fell into the meeting or exceeding range. That translates into 75 of our students. And that is it was actually a 5% drop from the previous year, and that translated into 5 students. In terms of students of the IEP 504 population, we were in the typical growth with 58.2, and we have that population, 39% were in the meeting or exceeding, and that's 12 students. And then we were a plus 10, which translated, we were able to move 4 students in the proficient range, which we were pretty happy with.
I don't want to break the format here, but I'd like to just do a clarification rather than a question.
Yeah.
It's important to remember that we're comparing different cohorts, not the same cohort. As we move forward future years, we're going to be looking at the same cohort from year to year, but that wasn't possible this year. Thank you.
For 6th grade math, the SGP was 33.7, which was low. But it should be stated for this cohort of kids, they had 3 different math teachers for just situations that were outside of our control. There was an illness, and then we just had to move different teachers in. So there was a lack of consistency for those kids. We had 42% of those kids were in the meeting to exceeding range, which is 55 kids. And then we were -9 compared to the previous year's cohort, and that was 10 kids. For the SGP for the IEP and 504 population, we were in the typical range with 40, and we had 8 kids. 26% were in the meeting or exceeding. That translates into 8 kids. And then we were compared to the previous year +4. So we moved 2 kids over. And although they did have these kids, the IEP kids still had 3 teachers. They had a consistent special education liaison, and she worked really hard. I think that made a big difference, that they were actually able to stay on task a lot, with all the change. Moving to 7th grade, the SGP for ELA was typical at 52.3. The meeting or exceeding percentage was at 58, which translates into 75 students. Compared to the previous year, we were +6%, which translated us into moving 10 students over. And then the IEP and 504 population, our SGP in 7th grade ELA was 42.3, which is in the typical range. And we had 17 students on IEPs and 504 get into the meeting or exceeding range, which is 5 students. And we did have, it was a -3 from the previous year, but that actually was 1 student.
Can I ask one clarification
Yeah.
question, just to make sure I'm reading? That top line, the 57.7% is percent proficient. The 6% is the plus minus. This compared to state, that's where we are relative to state average?
Yes.
Okay, that's just to
Yes.
make sure.
Yep.
Those numbers. Okay, thank you.
Grade 7 math, the SGP was 54.3, which was again in the typical range. We had 55% of the students in the meeting or exceeding expectations. which translated into 71 students. Compared to the previous year, we were a +9, which means we were able to move 14 students into the meeting or exceeding range. The SGP for IEP and 504, we were again in a typical 48.1. And we had 14% of kids on IEPs in the meeting or exceeding range. We were a -9 in the previous year, but that was 3 students. Eighth grade, you're gonna have to stick with me a little bit. It's a little interesting because in 2021, the state allowed opt-outs. And so we had a lot of opt-outs all of a sudden in 8th grade. 6th grade was pretty normal. 7th grade, every kid took it. We had 31 opt-outs for ELA, 35 opt-outs for math, and 39 opt-outs for science. That'll make sense when we go through some of the numbers, so just stay with me. For the SGP for 8th grade ELA, we were in the typical range with 51.7. We were in the meeting or exceeding. We had 53% of the student population in that, which was 70 students. Compared to the previous year, we were -4. We actually moved 15 students into meeting or exceeding. So because of smaller class size, 2021 was 124 compared to 132, which was 2022. So you already had 8 students down, and then you took another 31 out that opted out. So the percentages got so much, when you miss kids, it just got so much higher. So that's why it's kind of wonky there. Looking at IEP 504, we were 41.1, which is in the typical range for SGP. We had 25% of our IEP students in the meeting or exceeding range, which was 7. And then compared to the previous year, we were able to move 2 students into the meeting or exceeding. Grade A math, grade A math. SGP was typical again, 51.3. 46% of our students were in the meeting or exceeding range. That was 60 students. Compared to the previous year, we were a +6%. But student-wise, we were +21. The SGP for our students and the IEP and 504 population was typical at 50.3. 22% of those students were in the meeting or exceeding category. That translated into 6 students. And we were a +18 from the previous year, which we were able to move 5 more students into that range. And then grade 8 science and technology. Again, for science and technology, you take it in 5th and then you take it in 8th. So there is no SGP because there's no cohort in 7th grade to compare it to for the previous year. So for students in the meeting exceeding range, we were at 57%, which was 73 students. Compared to the previous year, we were a -2. We moved 23 students over into proficient. So that's where it gets a little wonky with the opt-outs. And then students on the IEPs and 504s, we were at 33%, which translated into 9 students. And compared to the previous year, we were +13%, which means we were, that translates to 5 students that we were able to move over. So looking at strengths, we had larger than average gains, likely due to increased stability during the 2021-22 school year. There were a number of positions impacted during the previous school year. We had a number of students that were out maternity leaves, illness. We had fantastic long-term subs, but they were not the regular classroom teacher. And I think that took a toll on some of the growth of students. So we were able to correct that next 2021-22, which I think made a big difference. We had a higher percentage of students that moved from meeting expectations to exceeding expectations in grade 7 ELA and math, and then grade 8 now. Challenges. We had higher rates of absences, tardies, and dismissals that led to learning loss for all students, or for most students. Again, we touched on it earlier, grade 6 math, they had 3 different math teachers in 2021-22. You know, Jason, at the end of the year, it was a big priority to him to get that settled. So he made a great decision for the school to move a seasoned teacher who had great routines and setup, and moved her into that 6th grade math position. So that next cohort of students that came in with that tough transition to middle school had a teacher that was seasoned and with great routines, and we're already seeing great gains with the current class. We're excited about that. 88 students on 504s and IEPs took the math test. 21% scored in the meeting expectation range. 58% scored in the partially meeting expectation. The next steps for us. Continue to provide structures and routines that help to support students, student academics and behavioral expectations, as well as being inclusive at reviewing our special education services. Continue to address the social and emotional concerns among students and staff. Continue to review content for relevancy, engagement, and critical thinking. And lastly, to reimagine our Tier 2 supports, Math Lab, Literacy Lab, Academic Support Center through a more data-driven approach to intervention. That is the end of my presentation. Does anyone have any questions?
Go ahead, Brad. I do. First of all, I appreciate this and appreciate you stepping in. I also appreciate you giving us the numbers. It helps to say that's 6 students, that's 9 students, statistics, and
Well, sometimes you see
Sure.
pretty big and it just,
Yeah.
it's not as crazy as it sounds.
So going through the packet beforehand, the 6th grade math scores got my attention. You've addressed a lot of that. It helps me understand it. My question is, what do we do with these numbers specifically there? I have the same question for you all, for everyone, about the difference between typical students and those on 504s and IPs. But what you said, Jason's action makes a lot of sense to me, is that let's make sure the next cohort coming through has stability in a seasoned teacher in 6th grade.
Mhm.
But the students who scored these are in 7th grade now.
Yes.
So my question is, so what are we doing like right now to make sure that we're supporting them as a cohort if the cohort seems to have some deficiencies?
So absolutely. So Jason, knowing he had to move the teacher to 6th grade, knew we'd have to open it up.
Mhm.
But the nice thing about being in Littleton is people want to work here because we're a good school system. So we knew we'd get a big candidate pool of strong people. Jason was very clear of what he wanted for that 7th grade math position. He really wanted a teacher who was versed in math that worked with problem solving.
Mhm.
A lot of the issues we're seeing, especially, is not so much I give you a formula, you give me the answer. It's, you know, the open response questions where you really have to think on your feet. You have to problem solve. You have to get creative. That's where we saw a lot of the problems with the kids were struggling with. They were falling short, especially in the open response. So when Jason looked, he wanted a teacher that was their thing, that they were going to do creative problem solving with the kids in terms of, I'm not going to give you this formula. It's more, it's like, here's the problem. How do you work to get that solution? Because that seems to be the biggest gap in the learning. We were lucky to get that. We were able to get a new teacher in. Andrew is phenomenal. That's his thing. He's from the University of Chicago. We got him from the Newton school system. His thing is whiteboard math, problem solving. That was Jason's #1 priority, was to bring it up first and do that. His wife teaches it. He sees the growth every day. That's how she does it. So that's the movement right now. Beyond supporting kids that are really, really struggling in specific targeted areas, then we can look at providing Tier 2 supports like through Math Lab.
Thank you.
No, I don't think I've fully formulated a question, but I think I'm sort of hearing this theme of like the really large impact our teaching staff has in supporting students. And particularly how that's sort of been upended in the last 3 years with not having in-person learning. And so I guess I'm just curious, sort of where, this might even be a question for you, Dr. Clenchey, and sort of where we are now in terms of stability. And if we were still sort of getting over COVID, I wouldn't fault the district because this is sort of a nationwide issue in terms of teacher shortage, but just how are we sort of recovering in terms of teaching stability post-COVID, if we can call ourselves post-COVID?
We're stabilized.
Okay.
We're one of the few districts that are stabilized in the state. So that goes a long way. And you also have to remember, when we're looking at IEPs, especially, a number of those students pre-COVID had cracks in their learning foundation. If you look at national research on effects of COVID with students on IEPs, those cracks are still there, but they're larger. So it's going to take a little longer for some of these students on IEPs to attain the achievement levels that we expect them to achieve. But the positive thing, there are many positives, the one that really stands out, I look at the SGP in those situations. If those kids are achieving typical growth, that means we're moving in the right direction. No doubt about it. So, and then we have other assessments as well. We can't forget the teacher generated assessments, the MAP assessments. So in terms of our MAP assessments, they're administered 3 times a year, and they're adaptive and they're immediate. So our teachers have that information that they can use right away to look at strengths and challenges for our students. That's very helpful as well.
And that was one of my larger questions that I can target here is that if this data, so it's troubling, or it's certainly, raised some eyebrows. Does it correlate with other data we are getting from MAP testing and other things that?
In terms of like, is this what we're seeing?
Yes, is what we're seeing consistently, or is this like it's MCAS? It's a standardized test. I take it one day. What do you do with it? I mean, I have some real concerns about that standardized test.
No, and I understand what you're saying, and I think no, I think the maps and that stuff. I think we're seeing it sort of a different story. I think what you have to look too is, and Beth hit it earlier. Our 6th graders, the first time they had taken the full MCAS, they were in 3rd grade. That's the only time they'd ever taken it. And the year before, they took the half test. I think for a lot of these kids, the stamina of the test, and what this test was asking them to do. And I was just talking to Jason about the other day. I think we all think of the spring, right? We're out of masks, everything was full boat. But we started the school year, eating in 2 cafeterias, really separating things. And when you deep dive, especially like in our ELA, it's open responses. And, if you're going to teach writing, you got to peer conference. You got to do one-on-one stuff. You can't you can teach the lesson on the board, but to make those impacts on how those kids can really write, you really need to do that stuff, teacher conferences, all those things. And we probably really couldn't get into that until about November to the mode where teachers were able to really do that. So you're talking they had, instead of the normal 7 months, you're talking 4.5. And I think that had an impact on kids. I think when you really deep dive into our data, it's a lot of the open responses, and that's that writing. And I think that was overlooked at how crucial that time period was missed.
Well, and intuitively, it makes sense to me that there would be, within the ELA subscores, there'd be a difference between reading scores and writing scores, because I can tell my 3rd grader, my 4th grader, 5th grader, hey, go read the book. And she might really like doing that. But I'm very rarely they say go write an essay or write a response. Like we talked last time, we were talking about incidental reading and how literacy in the wild kind of stuff. But we don't do much writing in the wild. So it makes sense to me that students have more practice. Many students have more practice with the reading and the writing. So I don't know if that makes sense to you as an educator, that there'd be the difference there. Does it?
Yeah, no. And I think I was talking to Diane Tricana about that. And she had to be like, oh, yeah, she kind of did to have more sort of, standing in front of the classroom. And she goes, at the moment I was able to, we moved. But so I just think that had an impact. And I think stamina, I think testing, getting in the swing, I think they all played a role. And
Well, if you remember back too, in January, our absenteeism went up because we had different strains of COVID going around. It was more infectious, and we still have the quarantine periods and isolation periods going on. So we had a lot of kids out. We had a lot of staff out as well. during those times. It's pretty easy to forget the experience we've had. That's probably a coping mechanism for us as we move forward, but we were not having a normal year in many ways last year. And again, we all know that stability of teachers in the classroom and attendance of students are predominant factors in setting up a scene for success.
I guess just have one last question about this number 4 about reimagining our teacher sports, especially, we all math literacy labs. Are we able to, once we've reimagined, to implement changes? Is that the kind of thing we can do immediately? Do you have the resources you need for this kind of thing?
No, we absolutely, we have the resources we need. This was just sort of a structure that we started the wheels on at the beginning of the year. We just want to make it more data driven and more fluid. So if a kid's struggling, in a specific area in math, we're gonna move, we find that the math lab would be valuable. They're not going to go into math lab. It's like, here's another class. We will meet with the student support team along with the teacher who's the math lab teacher who's delivering the intervention, and that student will be tagged with a goal.
The specific
goal for them to work on, because our classes are 80 minutes. So yes, there can be a general instruction, but then they're small. We keep them small for a purpose. So then they can specifically work, basically one-on-one to some extent to meet those goals. And then we give a time frame on that. So 6 weeks, 8 weeks, they'll reassess the goal. If the child has made progress, we will transition them out of the intervention, because we need to make room for other kids, because no one's going to struggle at the same time. So if that kid, we're able to transition out, that opens up that spot. It gives us more flexibility, more fluidity. And I just think it's going to be more impactful. Plus, we're going to be able to see what is the effects that we're seeing.
You're saying we're going to be able to in the future. Is this something that, are we doing this now? Or are we going to be doing more of this?
The goal is that we'll start at third trimester.
Thank you.
So some of the same questions, but I guess I'll say that this was a little surprising to see some of these scores, like in particular the 6th grade math. And I know we've touched on it, and we've seen a lot of test results, and we've heard a lot about the impacts of COVID, and we sympathize with that. We all went through it ourselves. We all have kids. We get it. It was tough, and we're all working at home and the best we can. And I know everyone was working in the schools to sort of close that gap. But the math in particular looks like this is a pre-COVID trend. So for the 6th grade, like 17, 18, 19, we were already on this trajectory of the blue area shrinking and the gray area growing, which is the exact opposite of what we want. So I'm concerned. I'm concerned that we're not doing what's necessary to have these 6th graders ready to be proficient or at least meeting expectations for 6th grade math. I mean, granted, we showed up in 2020 and nobody was talking about COVID for a full year and a half, but it appears to me that there's a lot of work that needs to be done with getting these kids ready, because in my opinion, if we're going to say we're a great school district and we're going to get a lot of applicant pool because teachers want to work here, the idea is that children should be meeting or exceeding, not just partially meeting expectations. I mean, we pay a lot of tax dollars to live in this town.
And I would say that I 100% agree with you.
Yeah.
And I think that's why that change was made.
Okay.
I think we had an opportunity to make a move that it wasn't made on a whim. It was made because this teacher has a particular set of skill sets where it's routines, structures. And I think that we needed to double down on that, especially with kids were coming in. That's what they were lacking. The teacher we put in that place did a wonderful job when she was in 7th grade. I think she's even more suited for it when she's in 6th now. I really think it's going to make a nice impact.
Okay.
Can I jump in?
Sure.
So I think another piece of that is that it can't all just happen in one grade level, right? It doesn't just happen in grade 6. There's years of education before that too. And so that's why, and we've said it before at these meetings, we have a new math curriculum, right? So we did take a step back and said, hang on, what's happening, right? K-5, how are we preparing them so that when they get to grade 6, right? They are not only there's a lot of transition happening, as Matt indicated, between elementary going into middle school. And so that's also a piece of this. And so this year is year one of implementation of that math program. And so we are hopeful that that is going to support, because it is we're having more shared vocabulary, right? So the skill sets are being built a little bit stronger with a new, because everyone's on the same page, it's coming in together, it's new. But it won't happen overnight. It's not going to happen in just, it doesn't, that these scores don't happen day one of sixth grade to MCAS day in sixth grade. It goes across years. So I think that's another piece to keep in mind too. And the next one, next gen was implemented too,
Sure.
is another piece of that puzzle.
I get that, and I'll clarify by saying that in no way, shape, or form is this a dig on the sixth grade team or anything. I realized that when you were a fifth grader before you became a sixth grader. But the reality is that when these kids are sitting down in sixth grade and taking tests, the majority of them aren't meeting expectations.
And this is the one data point where we're not, the one chart, if I recall correctly, that we're not tracking with statewide data, but it was a decline, which one of my questions, my list here is, are we seeing the effects of curricular changes? And it sounds like we would not yet see the effects of curricular changes, the lower elementary Russell Street. Those kids haven't done this new curriculum come up, but this is the data we're looking at right here is an argument for having made that curriculum change 2 years ago, which we did. Good.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Just
Yeah.
last year. So
Yeah, just last year.
it
So
should fill
yeah.
up.
I don't want to get too technical here, but I mean, when we look at standardized tests, it's kind of interesting because if you're not used to using statistics and the terminology of statistics, it's important to realize that our MCAS test has a standard deviation of 24. Well, if you know what that means, but that's quite a span of deviation. And you need to take that into account when you're looking at a standardized test such as the MCAS. I mean, again, I'm going to our adaptive test is going to give us, I think, better data when we're trying to bring these students back where they need to be. The other thing one has to consider is our MCAS tests are given 2 months before we finish the curriculum. So there's realignment of curriculum to make sure we cover concepts for the test, but we don't change curriculum so that it doesn't piggyback or coincide with the concept development. So there are some natural flaws in standardized tests. So if I had the magic wand, I would do a couple of things. I would, first of all, figure out a way to lower the standard deviation. And my second expectation would be I would give these exams in June, where we would be finished the course concepts, etc. So again, I'm not downplaying the importance of an assessment, but it's one assessment, and those two factors are huge when you look at a standardized test. So I just want to put things in perspective here. And our teacher assessments are huge as well as in terms of following where our students are and where they're going. I mean, one of the things I'm more curious about as we go on is looking at our students on IEPs and making sure that whoever is teaching in the core academics is able to cover those concepts prior to that MCAS exam. There could be some reasons why they're not. I mean, the diversity of students on IEP is huge. And then what do we need to do? And you've heard me make many statements since you've been working with me is when possible, our students on IEPs need to be included in the regular academic classes with the teacher that's teaching that all day long, especially at middle school. So those are things I'm looking for as we're moving forward as well to make sure that those checks and balances are in place, and also a review of our sequencing in these core courses to ensure that we're hammering or covering these concepts prior to these kids taking the MCAS exam. The MCAS exam doesn't test the whole curriculum. Never has, never will, because you can't if you're testing that early. So there's just some things that we're working on and making sure that we're aligned as much as we possibly can.
Sure. I mean, I'm familiar with that concept because I have elementary children. So, that first progress report, it says partially meeting expectations as an parent. You're like, my child's a good kid. What's going on? And the idea there is that there's a lot of school year left for them to fully meet the expectations. But my assumption here is that when a sixth grader sits down to take this exam in May, or did you say it was in April?
March, April.
that the assumption is that they're meeting expectations, you know, that the benchmark is for at that present time, that it's not like we were testing in the fall and they haven't yet learned the curriculum. I mean, I get that maybe we haven't hit a concept or two, but I don't know that it explains.
But the comparison to other data in the state, they're all taking the same.
They're
time.
taking the same time as well, so. Yeah.
Yeah, if I could just add, it's hard to formulate really a question, and this might be bringing this still more of a question for you, but there's so many layers to it. You know, we're saying that MCAS standards are going to be going up. Is that correct? We're kind of preparing for a different standards. We're doing different, they're rearranging the tests. We're rearranging a little bit our special ed programs and what we're doing with the kids and who's going to be involved. We have our middle school kids who might be lacking for various reasons, which are all understandable, but they're also very much impacted by COVID and kind of the foundations of more complex education, which they're going to be getting into towards the high school. So I think the only a red flag that I see is this may bottleneck in the next few years, kind of towards the high school. We're going to find these kids have had a lot of variables that they've been working through. And I guess my question is, how are we preparing the high school teachers and staff for that, for when these kids come through? You know, these deficiencies are, it is what it is. There's so many variables that came through, but I just see kind of a big tidal wave potentially coming towards the high school if we don't get ahead of it and get ready for that.
So I know people kind of mentioned, but the other thing is, I mean, your bullet number 4.
Yeah.
Start, it's so that it goes from tsunami to tidal wave, and it continues to go down by putting in better supports and at the tier 2 level. So that way it's less of a potential wave, as you're saying, when they get to high school. You know,
Right. And another thing that we are working towards is making sure that we have more like vertical alignment from what the middle school is doing, the high school is doing, having more communication between the middle school staff, high school staffs. Our curriculum coordinators are 6 to 12. And so we make sure that, you know, they have their monthly meetings and we're seeing what they're seeing right now at the middle school already. And so we can plan for that, the high school as the years go on. Actually, we have a meeting coming up next week with, you know, myself, Jason, looking to go to the curriculum coordinators to look at, you know, the overall view of the math department and kind of where we're going, middle school math, and then how it impacts high school math, because, you know, however they structure the middle school math program will impact the high school, whether it's in different offerings or, you know, just structures, whatever it is. So we make sure we have that vertical alignment in all departments, but right now math.
Yeah.
So.
No, and that's great to hear, because a lot of the variables and things are out of our hands completely, but at the end of the day, the kids have to pass these tests, they have to meet certain standards, and I just want to make sure that they're going to have that support if they're still lagging behind the next 2 years, because we're still picking up the pieces a little bit.
Yeah, and one thing we have done for as long as I've been here at least, is that the Algebra 1 curriculum is pretty much standardized, whether they can take it in 8th grade or 9th grade. And so that it's similar instruction, similar assessments, and it's a matter of when the student takes the course. But we'll have students who will come to us having already completed the Algebra 1 course. And if they did well on that course, they go to geometry right away as a freshman. Or if they, you know, struggled some, they could retake the Algebra 1. If they're in 8th grade math, they're taking the Algebra 1. So we're trying to put structures in place, whether it's at the middle school or the high school, to make sure that we are filling the gaps. And then we use the ALEX program. That's something we have been using the past couple of years to fill even more gaps. And so we have identified some students this year, like particularly in the 9th grade, who, for a variety of reasons, whether it's interruption in learning, whatever it is, were behind in math in particular. And so we're able to identify that and, you know, provide other resources, whether it's like outside tutoring, that kind of thing, bring people into the building to help reinforce some of those foundational math skills that our students maybe didn't have. They got through middle school, whether it's in our district or in other districts, because of COVID, right? And so they maybe got through when they wouldn't have before. And so we are seeing some of those gaps right now with some of our 9th graders in particular. And we're working to address those gaps and, you know, bring in resources to help fill those gaps.
And for me, the missing part of the puzzle for this year is the third administration of that test. That's going to give us some really good data to look at here in terms of what kind of progress have we made this year with all students. that will help set direction for next year as well.
Quick question. So we had received map results before, and one of the questions that the committee had was, hey, can we take a look at how Littleton does as compared to other towns? Because that was, we were looking at a national average, which we felt like, hey, Massachusetts is one of the better states here to begin with. So is the playing field a little uneven? And what we heard was not everybody around us does math, but in this case, everybody around us does do MCAS. So
Right.
Can we actually, maybe as a follow-up, take a look at some of the surrounding towns that we feel like are our peers and see how we're doing as compared to them?
Yeah, we can do a search. I mean, what the map testing really originated in the Western United States and started making its way east since I'm obviously have experience in the western part of the country and educated in the western part of the country. I think I mentioned to you, I've been using map testing since 1985. So it's one of the reasons why it's in our district. So again, sometimes if you don't know about these things, they implement them in districts and different philosophies, I guess, but we'll see what we can do. I mean, the national norms on the map testing.
I guess my question is more related to the MCAS though. Like, can we take this data and look at some of the surrounding towns, which we might consider ourselves peer
Oh,
groups?
MCAS data?
MCAS data.
Oh, I
Like,
thought you were on.
Yeah, we're tracking
No.
to hear the state data.
We asked the
but-
question last time and you gave us a sufficient answer that the data really doesn't exist, but now I believe the data probably does likely exist for us to compare ourselves to some other towns that might have similar,
Like districts.
Yeah, like districts.
Yeah. Yeah, we can take a look at that. Yeah.
I would be interested in
Yeah,
seeing the data. I mean, I recognize that we had a curriculum change and not other districts haven't, but we all did COVID together. I would just be curious to see.
That was my question number 2. And that I have lined up.
It's a good question.
One thing Keith said earlier, can I just get to that? I think one of the things we do really, really well in professional development and in our structures is having the middle school and high school work together and have the lower elementary work together. Every time I hear about that, it just makes so much sense. I'm not sure all districts do that, but I'm glad we do.
Sure.
Russell Street, I do want to say that, sorry.
Lynn?
I just wanted to add one thing. Open Architect does allow us to compare against other districts, so that is something that we would be able to do.
Great, thank you.
I just wanted to start by letting you know that while you were finishing with math, Andrea and I designed a term 3 WIN elective called Writing in the Wild.
I love that.
Before I get started, I just wanted to add just a few kind of general things. And that is when we were sitting together over the past couple of weeks, really talking about this information and putting this presentation together. As we were talking in the group, I indicated that I have kind of a unique perspective, having been an administrator at the high school first, and then at the middle school, and then at the elementary. And typically this presentation starts with Russell Street and goes to middle school and goes to high school. And I think the really important piece to keep in mind is if you think back year after year after year, the information that the high school is sharing is that the kids pass, right? And when it's really important, and it's not, and I don't mean that every year it's not important, but when students need to pass for graduation, it's their requirement, they pass. So I think that's like the kind of the gold standard, right? And, as we go down the years, some of this is challenging for our kids. I have thought about and talked about with Andrea MCAS information more than I'm proud to admit over the past couple of weeks, but we really came to the conclusion that if we're going to talk about the pandemic, and I look forward to the day that we're not talking about that anymore, that these kids are the Russell Street kids that are on this data were really impacted. If you think about that, the third graders were in first grade when they went home, and they're in second grade interrupted. Education was interrupted. Our fourth graders as well. Our fifth graders, if you think about that, were incredibly interrupted. As third graders, they didn't take the test at all. And then in fourth grade took just the individual subtests. And so I think it's all kind of important to frame this under that umbrella.
Cheryl, the third graders had their kindergarten year interrupted.
Correct.
Right.
And yeah, and two, when you think about the change from, Andrea said this in conversation the other day, and I was like, that's really a good way to frame this. When you're thinking about coming from Sugar Lane to Russell Street, where you are learning to read, and coming to Russell Street, where you are reading to learn. And then when you take all of this interruption into consideration, we were kind of jumping for joy with our third grade numbers. So as Matt indicated with the science scores, there's no SGP here because there isn't anything to compare it to. It's the first time our students took the test. So in ELA, our third graders were meeting and exceeding 64%. I quickly did all of the math as Matt had his numbers, so that that's 76 students. While it was down 6%, it was 76, it was still 76 students. And in our students with disabilities category, 46%, which is 13 students, again, which was up 6%. It's important to reiterate, as everyone before me had said, that when we're talking about small numbers, even a big percentage could equal just a handful of kids. In our math scores, again, for third grade, no SGP exceeding, meeting or exceeding was 57%, equates to 68 students. That was up 11% from previous. Our students with disabilities was 52%. That's 15 students. That was up 32%. So rah, rah, for our third grade, they were awesome. Fourth grade, the SGP is there, 53.5% typical growth. Our students meeting or exceeding was 56%. That's 77 students. That was down 9%, but still 56% meeting or exceeding. Our student growth percentile for students on with disabilities, 49.9%, which again is typical growth. Meeting or exceeding was 24%. That's was down 9%, but that 24% number is 8 students. In fourth grade math, the student growth percentile again was typical at 47.3%, meeting or exceeding 50%. That's 70 students compared to, it was up 6% from the previous year. The student growth percentile 43.6 is again typical, meeting or exceeding with students with disabilities was 21%. That's 7 students, up 11%. So our fourth graders did well. You'll see that there's less impressive news when we get to fifth grade. And again, to reiterate that how impacted these students were in terms of taking fourth grade, the test in fourth grade and the test in third grade, they didn't take it all. Student growth percentile for fifth grade ELA was 46.3, which is typical. Meeting or exceeding 48%, that's 57 students. It was unfortunately down 11%, but still 57 students. The student growth percentile for students with disabilities was low, 33.9%. The meeting or exceeding with students with disabilities is 12%. That's 4 students. And compared to the previous year, that was down 9%. The 19%, excuse me, that's a scary number, but our total number of students in this category is 28. So the 19% is 5 students. In grade 5 math, whoops. Sorry. In grade 5 math, again, 49.1% for student growth percentile is typical. Meeting or exceeding 49%, that's 58 students, it's down 1%. Our student growth percentile for students with disabilities was 40.9, which is typical on the low end of typical, but typical growth. Meeting or exceeding was 12%. That's 4 students. Again, it was down by 15%. Go on to science and then my comments. No student growth percentile. This is the first time students take the science test. Meeting or exceeding was 63%. That's 74 students. That was up 7%. And with our students with disabilities category, it was 30%. That's 11 students. And there was no change from the previous year. A couple of things to add before I go to the other slides. We talked a little bit about sort of those soft skills that come along with students taking the test. And I think it's really important at this age, third, fourth, and fifth, to realize that and understand that students are not only learning academic content, but they're also learning test taking strategies and skills. So that's all part of this, and we'll see in the following slides really what we do to remedy that. One of the really important things that the students get, but and practice, but not to the degree necessarily of MCAS testing, is the amount of stamina it takes to do the test. And it's sometimes cute, but sometimes worrisome that, and I remember my own daughter, who's now 26 years old, saying when she went to third grade, I'm going to take the MCATs. She was calling them MCATs. You know, our kids in third grade will say, you know, oh, I'm really scared because we take MCAS this year. They like, it's something they've heard about, and other kids tell them, oh, it's so hard. And so there's that whole factor. And so, you know, in third grade and fourth grade, we're really trying to teach those soft skills as part of our regular practice and kind of ease kids into this scary thing that they're going to do in the spring. But certainly the stamina for taking the test is really kind of important. And it's important to note. So when we go on to the impressions for Russell Street, the strengths certainly were, our test participation rates were extremely high. Surprisingly, only 6 students didn't take the test, which is kind of amazing. Our Russell Street students demonstrated typical growth in most areas. Our third graders did really well in both ELA and math. Our fourth graders did well in math, and our fifth graders did well in science. You know, it is important, again, to remember that the numbers that we're talking about are low numbers. So, you know, it's difficult to talk about some of our special education programs. We have a lab classroom, we have a PACE classroom, and it's really hard to talk about some of the specifics without inadvertently identifying students that are in those programs. So I think it is important to note, though, that those programs, as Matt indicated, and Keith, that those programs come from this data, right? When we're analyzing this data and we see a need, MCAS is one piece of data, but we're also looking at MAP and any other benchmark assessments that kids take. And when we're analyzing that data, that's where these needs come from, when we realize that there is a need, and that's where these programs have come from over time. In our challenges, as I just indicated, learning to take the test, learning test-taking strategies is really important, and it's something that we really emphasize with teachers, that they build in test-taking strategies and to start doing tasks that are longer and more involved, so kids do build their stamina over the year. I can envision this little third grader last year, and I think I mentioned it last year, when I peeked into a classroom, and all I could see was her little face over the top of the computer screen, and she was typing away and her little tongue was out and she was just having it. And it's just great on that hand that they really were like, you know, doing the test, really involved, but it's hard too. You know, there's students that are in tears about it as well. And so we really have to try to accommodate that at the age level of kids that we have. So remembering that and the challenge always is that our third graders are taking the test for the very first time. One of the really important things is to look at scope and sequence of the curriculum to make sure, as Dr. Plenty was indicating a little bit ago, where things fall and where things are being covered. You know, if fractions is a big part of on the MCAS test and kids are struggling with that, you don't want to be covering fractions either not at all or right before the test or much earlier. So you need to be able to teach the content and then continue to have it to wrap around and continue to practice. I added these percentages here because the 30% in grade high seems significant to us. In grade 3, this information, 24% of the grade was considered a student with a disability, 5 or IEP. In grade 4 was 25%, and in grade 5 it was 30%. So that's important to note. Focusing in on the right testing accommodations for each student. I had this conversation with some special education teachers, and when we're designing, when students meet criteria for eligibility on an IEP or a 504, part of the conversation is accommodations for regular classroom testing and also accommodations for MCAS testing. And at this level, it's you really trying to hone in on exactly the right accommodation for students. And sometimes at the beginning, in the early stages of an IEP, you're really trying to figure that out. You can put the absolute best accommodation on an IEP that you think will be wonderful for a student, and they refuse to use it. They don't feel comfortable with it. And so you really try to, sometimes that's, a little bit of a slippery slope until you really can hone it. So that's just an important kind of thing to remember. The scheduling for the MCAS test, and Dr. Clancy mentioned this a bit ago too. We have the beginning of trimester 3 this year, for example, will be March 17th. The first day of the MCAS testing window is April 27th. So we're 2 trimesters in and a couple weeks, and we're starting to test. So in our staff meeting last week, Mrs. Romano and I were talking to the teachers about working up a draft schedule. And typically what the teachers say, when you say, here's the window, they want to be at the end of the window, the testing window, like as much time as we can possibly have in our classroom with kids doing regular curriculum to be ready. But you can't do every session of every test at the end of the window. So some people, it's really kind of a little tap dance to figure it all out. And again, as we've said numerous times, interrupted learning during the pandemic. I hope that's the last time I have to say that. In terms of next steps, in terms of next steps, and I've written on this slide beginning trimester 2, but this is, because we are beginning trimester 2, but this is something that Andrea and I talk about with staff at the beginning of the year. With our students, if we are regularly practicing MCAS type reading, writing, and math problems, it increases familiarity and it makes these things less scary to them, especially our third graders. If they regularly complete math problems on Chromebooks to learn how to use the drag and drop toolbox. So we noticed in the past that has been part of the sticking point. It wasn't the curriculum, but it was that students had difficulty picking up the ruler and dragging it over to use it. And so sometimes, something that's a tool on the test is what requires the practice, not the test or the content, but something in the toolbox. We really want students to practice doing math problems using a reference sheet. Sometimes younger kids aren't used to doing that. And so they get this reference sheet and they're like, what does this even mean? And so it's important that in regular math class, they're using a reference sheet. So when they get that one on the MCAS test day, they know how to use it. It's also really important that, for example, Beth had talked before about our new Into Math curriculum. And it's really important to look at ways that any of our curriculum addresses content areas that were previously weak. If fractions, for example, was something that kids found challenging, and we know that from looking at the item analysis of MCAS, I'm just using fractions as an example, then, when you are looking at new curriculum, it's really important to ask that question, does this new curriculum address the areas that are weak? So obviously we wanted to help you along the way. Somebody mentioned before, about the PD, and it's really important to remember that we have really strong PD. The Lucy Calkins extended writing came from that as a weakness years ago with our at the elementary level, saying kids have a hard time writing longer writing passages. Our Lucy Calkins curriculum and all of that PD for teachers came from that. Foundations that came from a need for phonics at our younger grades. And teachers have have strong PD in that area, and now Into Math is just another example where the PD is really strong. I think it's important to remember too, and I'll just share this little cute tidbit. A third grade teacher came by just yesterday to tell me that her class had done a benchmark assessment from the Into Math, and 18 of 21 of her students, that's 86%, met or exceeded the proficiency indicator. So that was awesome. And when she was sharing this good news with her class, one of her little students raised his hand and he said, "Did we do MCAS?" And she said, no, we did a benchmark assessment. But when you do MCAS, it's the same thing because we do hard things. And they all kind of, got on board with, yes, we do hard things. And so that's, the really important message to get to kids is that while the MCAS might be hard and challenging, they do hard things every day. And so that's really what the message that we're trying to get across to our kids. Just in terms of the toolbox and using the reference sheet, we just a couple of days ago, Heidi McGregor shared with us, and I'm just giving this as an example, that there's a new feature for the science and technology and engineering MCAS tests, and there's 2 new features: an arrow interaction and animations. And there's a whole tutorial on how to use those things. So again, it's important that our 5th graders and the 8th graders go into that tutorial as part of the regular instruction and do some practice with that. So when they get to that part of the test, they're not saying, what am I supposed to do with this animation? Because at that, there's no instructions. When we get on the MCAS, it's here's your animation, use it or don't. So I'm just adding that's something important that we have to make sure that we do to make sure that really have all of the tools that they need in time for the test. And that's my last slide. Any questions for me?
Questions? I've asked a lot of my questions. I'll just point out the 5th grade numbers here. The difference between typical students and those in 5-4 IEPs. If 30% of the class is 5-4 IEPs and only 12% of those 30% are partially meeting expectations, that number catches my eye. And I'm just saying that in both cases, it's 48 and 12, 49 and 12. That's a really big difference for a really large percentage of our class.
Yeah.
And that's a question I'll have for the entire district is what explains this big difference? Is there one explanation?
Yeah.
And that one in particular, I mean, if we can celebrate, we should celebrate what we see in the 5th grade numbers, the 3rd grade numbers, those where the gap is only 5%.
I think the important thing to remember for us, and Andrea and I were having this conversation at the table in my office yesterday, and I asked a question and she said, "Oh no, I can tell you." And she opened up the program and knew the student. And I think that's a really important factor to keep in mind is that this is not a random number for us. We can look at those 4 students or those 8 students and go in and see who they are, right? So when instead of saying I'm dealing with 12%, I'm really dealing with Brad, right? And what do we need to do for Brad to fix that? And so it's, you know what I mean? And so while we're giving out numbers, we can on our end go in and figure out exactly who the students are and really kind of paint a better picture of what we need to do and plan accordingly.
But the challenge, if I understand it correctly, is how many 5th graders do we have?
In
Roughly 100-ish.
Here, there was 118.
Okay, so we have 30% of 118 is 34, and only 12% of those 34 are meeting. So it's not for that. We got to talk about Brad and get up to speed. It's like there's a much smaller number that's actually doing it, and a much larger number of those who aren't.
Exactly.
And so it's not a list of if my math makes sense, of the 5 or 6 who we have to target, it's the 5 or 6 we don't have to worry as much about, and the larger number, the 28 that we do.
Right, but my point is, even if it is 28 and that's the number we're looking at, the kids who weren't in the 12%, the minus 19 or whatever the number, we can still put a name to that number.
Sure.
And then be able to go back in and determine what course of action we have for those students and what kind of, as I talked about, doing the explicit practice and things like that, that takes place in the learning centers in grade 3, grade 4, grade 5, throughout our building. So it isn't something that's, just happens in the regular classroom. And it is common practice for teachers to go and look at their new roster for this year. How did my kids do last year on the MCAS test? That's important data, and teachers are kind of clamoring for it in the fall.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right.
Are we gonna have a larger conversation?
Yeah.
Can we? Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
I don't want to, do you have questions you want to ask first or? Because I basically have two types of questions.
Sure.
One is curricular. We've heard a lot of suggested changes were, I really appreciate Cheryl talking about the soft skills, reminding us that taste taking is a skill, the drop down menus. Keith, I think you're talking about some of the same stuff. I like that we want to do everything we can to have the test accurately reflect the knowledge of our students and abilities of our students. I'm always concerned about anything that seems like teaching to the test because we want to improve these scores because your school committee is going to ask you about the scores, right? And so that's more of a comment than a question is that it strikes me that a lot of our things, a lot of this changes we'll make are kind of curricular, where we're bringing in the math labs, we're doing more of these things where we have the new curriculum, we're using the Lucy Calkins stuff, all that stuff. I love those things. It's just teaching to a test, just that worries me a little bit. I take, and I'm like you were saying earlier, I'm not being articulate here. I take what you're saying earlier, Dr. Punchy, about look, it's a standardized test that has its limitations. There's a standard deviation. It's one data point. I don't want to. We're also paying a lot of attention to these numbers. We spent an hour and a half talking about them. I'd hate for us to upend our entire curriculum and move things around so that these numbers look a little better for the committee next year. And that's more of a comment, I guess.
Can I just add, I think we talk about that too, because we don't want to start in September saying MCAS, and have that be the end all be all
Right.
for everybody, right? But I do think that there's opportunities when teachers have a problem of the day or a problem of the week, that it's important at our level, certainly, but I would say in any of the buildings, to call it an MCAS practice problem, right? And really explain, like, when we get to the MCAS test, is the passage may be longer than something we typically do in class, or the wording might be different, or whatever it is. Like, you can go onto the DESE site and pick out practice problems for everything. And it's just important. So instead of teaching to the test, it's kind of like putting vitamins at home. And
It's like, it's normalizing what it is, right? And I think it goes, like, to take it a step further, I think the same could be said for anything to do in education or anything to do with parents. Right? Like, the more you talk about it, the more you use that language, the more it becomes familiar, and then it's not so scary, right? So I think those are the types of strategies and the types of things that we try to put into practice on a fairly regular basis.
Browning, I'm glad you brought that up. We will never teach to the test. And our job is to develop a strong curriculum that meets the needs of every student. To be quite honest with you, I could turn this around very quickly, but it wouldn't be a strong curriculum. It would be teaching to a test, which is meaningless. I've been in this business a long time, and when I first started in administration, I was hired to turn schools around. So I know very well how to do that. But my job is to develop a powerful, authentic curriculum that's going to instill long-term knowledge in students and build a foundation so that they're going to be successful after they graduate high school. And we'll continue to do this. I see this as a blip. I mean, if the SGPs were lower, I would have greater concerns. And I'm still waiting for the final map testing to complete my own puzzle in terms of helping direct what we're going to be doing next year. I'm anticipating our results next year will be stronger, but we're not whole yet. And to expect us to be whole would be wrong. Because as I pointed out, we had cracks prior to COVID, and those cracks are bigger for some of our students, and it's going to take a little more time. And let's not forget the social and emotional learning component, the stress, the anxiety that we're dealing with, which is significant. Quarter of the student population in most school districts across this nation are suffering from stress and anxiety. That's pretty high. So it's not just a powerful academic curriculum, it's a powerful social and emotional curriculum as well, and teaching students with strategies that address trauma as well, because trauma is significantly up in every district in Mississippi within the nation as well. So I mean, we're aware of these things. We're moving in the right direction, and we will keep using multiple assessments to determine what we need to do.
And just comment on your comment, because I think we have similar perspectives and standardized tests, and question how much they assess knowledge learned versus ability to take that particular test. And I actually appreciate, because I often think with standardized tests, the reason they're not actually equitable is because of barriers. And I think what you're doing is removing barriers for our students so that they can actually share their knowledge versus get the question wrong because they get stuck on something like an arrow. And it sounded like, curriculum wise, there's not, so the scores say this and we're lacking in this. And so we switched our whole curriculum just to do that. Like you're saying, we don't teach to a test. But I think the removing of barriers is really important as a strategy.
And that's where, Mr. Mono, what you're talking about, hey, this will help you on MCAS. I'm not doing it because of MCAS. We're doing it because it's what we need to learn and the skill we need to develop. It'll help you. You should be really confident on MCAS. You're able to do that kind of thing. That's the framing that I love to hear that we're doing. I guess one of the things that's encouraged me so much over the last couple of years talking about curriculum is hearing at the middle school and high school level, particularly about the shift towards more project-based learning. That was one of the things a positive we took from the last couple of years, the shift to group working and stuff like that. I hate to see that kind of movement, which I strongly support, eroded by let's make sure these numbers go up a little bit. And it doesn't sound like we're going to. I just wanted to say for the record, I hope we don't.
Right. I was going to add that another piece of adjusting your curriculum to help meet some of these MCAS standards is just different types of assignments, types of reading, types of writings that mirror what's on the MCAS, but it's also strengthening student skills they'll need to be successful in high school and after high school. In particular for us is that, in the old test, there was a long comp and you had to recall a book you read at some point, you highlight the main character. It was a very standardized prompt, whereas now the reading passages are, it's about a science topic, or it's about different types of reading, different types of writing. So developing those skills in the classrooms is not teaching to the test, but it's shifting how we instruct in different types of reading and writing that they're working on to prepare the student for success in school, in life, but also on the MCAS as a result.
And one of the important things we need to continue to do is take a look at data and use it as a way to address challenges that we see. But in order to do that, you need to create a climate that isn't pointing fingers. It's truly inquisitive, wanting to explore and wanting to find solutions. I mean, I spent part of my career in a very standardized environment where we had a plus or minus 5 deviation between the final exam and the exam awarded to the student. So, I mean, those climates can prevent progress if you're not careful. So you have to, nobody wants our students not to succeed. And I feel very comfortable making that statement. And the philosophy we have and the climate we need to continue to create is we need to work together to do whatever we can to have every student succeed. And so we look at these things as challenges that have solutions to them.
If I can follow up on that, earlier you said, I could turn this around. I'm not in any way suggesting, I don't think any of ourselves, we need to turn this around.
I know.
So just want to be clear about that. But you just said, take a look at data and use it to, recognize where there may be some challenges and have an open conversation on how to address them. Looking at this data, a challenge for me seems to be a significant gap between performance of students not on IEPs and 504s and those on IEPs and 504s. 38% and, looking at 10th grade, 27, 38%, 31%, 41%, 31%, 32%, 36%, 37%. Those are, even if the numbers themselves are small, those percentages are meaningful. And I just like, this is the kind of the whole room question for the staff, I guess, is, we've heard a lot about, hey, we get together, we look at this data, we're starting to have conversations what to do with it. I'd love to know what you think when you see those numbers. I'm sure you noticed them. What are we thinking about these numbers?
And can I just add to that too? Because I think that was one of the questions that I had, one thing that I struggle with when we're talking about the 504s and IEPs, there's such a broad spectrum of students, right? Like that's the thing where I get hung up on with those percentages. Because I know that that's just a very wide range of students that could be struggling throughout their entire career in school. So to add to Brad's question is, how are you guys, and if you guys can separate that data out to understand the kids that maybe just are on one IEP for speech or for something pretty simple, they're doing fine, they're in the median or exceeding, but the kids that you would expect that might be falling behind, you know, those are the kids that maybe those are the percentages of kids that we're seeing that are struggling, and how we're continuing to support them. Because I think the MCAS, the whole thing is no kid left behind, right? In a district like ours, where we do have really strong students and strong academics and teachers, the kids that could get left behind are the ones that have more severe disabilities. Those are the kids that we have to keep our eyes out for. That's what for our district, that's what I feel like MCAS is built for. So what are we doing as a school district to identify those and follow them? That's
Well, I think it's just certainly at our level, it's as I indicated before, when we're looking at, we go back into the data and identify exactly who the students are. And then figure out, you know, is this something that we maybe anticipated? Sometimes it's a student we didn't anticipate at all what happened. And that might be a student that just is, was over anxious that day or something like that. You know, just wouldn't expect the student to not do well on the test and they didn't do well. So we have to figure that out. But the students that you identify, that when you go back and look at it, that's we meet about that and determine how we want to move forward. And it's part of their instruction, like building their stamina, all of those things I talked about, to make sure that they have practice as part of their regular routine on, what to anticipate for the test.
And I can add too, in terms of students who are on 504 plans, we have a really strong system in place to support our guidance counselor, our school psychologist. We have different things built into our days to support those students, in addition to all the other things we do. So it's not just the students on the IEPs, but it's the students on the 504 plans as well. We have systems and routines and things that are put into place to support the students. So, and that's something that we're always reevaluating and looking to see if we need to strengthen or, add more to.
I just wanted to ask too, I think the question you had asked Justin earlier about comparisons with school districts, I think that would be really interesting in that particular scenario, because like you said, the pattern is what's concerning, and standardized tests test your ability to take a test. And with this particular group, stamina, I'm guessing, plays a really big part in this. And so I'd actually be really curious to compare sort of gaps, particularly with MCAS, with other districts and where we sort of fall there.
Let us know about this weekend.
Len?
Hi there. I just wanted to agree. I couldn't tell who was speaking, but I think it is very important to make sure that we are looking for the needs of the students and identifying whether it's a student on an IEP versus a 504. An IEP is a student who requires specialized instruction, but there are students who even throughout the pandemic, they may have been on an IEP because they had solely therapeutic needs and not academic needs, but were very impacted. It's our most vulnerable group of students. And so, we obviously would expect to see them impacted, but we also need to look at our students who are on 504s and look at their performance as well, because there are students who are in 504s for a wide range. It could be a learning need, it could be a medical need. Students who have diabetes could be on a 504 for certain accommodations. It could be something not at all related to needing any type of academic accommodations. So I just think that's a really important point, and we do need to look at that and look at that information.
One thing I'd like to bring up, and I wasn't going to, but I think it's an important part of our conversation. We need to offer multiple forms of assessment for students. And I'm going to share an example with you. A number of years ago, I was doing a research study, and I I wanted a research partner to do some of it for me because it would decrease bias. And person with a doctorate degree, taught at a university. He had to recertify with the university I was doing research at to do the research. And he almost dropped out of doing the research because he had such a fear of taking an exam. It's a guy with 4 degrees, a doctorate degree. So it's something that you need to be aware about. There are some students, some adults that are terrified of writing exams. You ask them to write something, you ask them to do a presentation. They know the knowledge, they have the knowledge, they can demonstrate it. So we can't think about people fitting in the same box all the time, because that's just not who we are as individuals. And in every district, we do have students like that. I'm not saying there are a lot, but there are. I mean, test anxiety is real. So we need to think about those things as well as we develop strong curriculums and support our students to develop the not only the rigor, but the perseverance and the skill sets to be successful in life.
I just had, I just had one more thing to say. When we're looking at percentages of students too, I want to be clear that our percentages of students on IEPs, it ranges from 12% to 22%. So when we're talking about, 30%, there is a percentage of that, which is students on 504 that are accommodation plans versus IEPs too. So that's just another important, we don't have 30% of a grade on IEPs.
Yeah, which makes the data even messier, right?
Yes.
That's where y'all who have access to student files can disaggregate. And that was my question is, I assume that we are doing this and we are trying to, because these gaps are significant, they're persistent. There is a pattern. And I just want to make sure that we're aware of this and we're looking at it.
And can I say too, like the as you said, there are patterns, but a lot of these patterns that we're seeing are patterns we would expect to see. So when we look at our patterns of percentages with students in IEPs, we're going to see lower percentages because we're going to see diagnostic profiles emerging. We're going to see the biggest kind of bubble of students, which is consistent with what we would expect to see. We've got the largest percentage of students on IEPs at grades 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then we see what we're doing is working and students are able to kind of meet their goals and we're able to understand their learning profiles and accommodate them appropriately. And so then we see a decline, a decline in the percentage of students on IEPs, which again is what we would expect to see, which those things are good things. So we're a lot of what we're seeing is what we would expect to see. And it's also things that we would be expecting to see pre-pandemic. It's just that everything is relative and commensurate too. So I think it's important to highlight that as well.
And at the same time, there are gaps that we realize that need to be closed.
And I think one positive pattern, even though they're different cohorts, you see from the Russell Street to middle school to high school, those percentages of kids that are meeting or exceeding are increasing throughout everybody. So it's not just the IEP and 504 that are remaining stagnant. As they are going through the high school, we're seeing them improve. I think we'd all probably want to see them improve more, obviously, but we are seeing that pattern, which I would expect to be what we would see regardless of what cohorts you're comparing.
Yeah, I think there are two patterns. One is that they're improving, and I think Cheryl drew our attention to that, and I appreciate it. But also that the gap remains persistent.
Yeah.
And for all the reasons we've articulated, I'm not arguing with anything. I'm just saying that these numbers caught my attention, and I want to make sure we're paying attention. It sounds like we are.
Keith, did you have something to add?
The only thing I was going to add is that obviously, as years go by, different years, there's different cohorts of kids, different in special education, different levels of intensity of need. So we've gone over in the years that I've been here, situation where we had more small group instruction versus more inclusive instruction. And so depending on what the needs are for the kids, we really try to target what they need in that particular cohort and either develop more small group stuff for kids who need more small group instruction, or more co-taught model or whatever it is to help include students into the general instruction, the content specialist. So that's, I guess, what we're doing is looking at that piece of like, how do we instruct kids who have IEP in particular in the situation, but also, some of our PD has been focused on universal design for learning. And so putting that stuff into place and helping our teachers, our general ed teachers in particular, try to adopt different types of instructional pedagogy that will address some of the gaps with general ed versus special education, removing the barriers that you mentioned before into learning. I think that will bring us to a spot where we're going to help close those gaps.
Good. I'll just quickly add that I took a quick look through some surrounding towns, Pure Lake, and their numbers are similar to ours. So it's not like our numbers aren't necessarily alarming. I don't want to paint the case here that as potentially the numbers person, that I'm an alarmist here. So what it tells me is the test is pretty hard. And at the end of the day, most of our kids end up, just about everybody ends up passing the exam. And Keith, to your point earlier, like the most important thing is that we end up graduating students that are ready for the real world, whatever that next step is for them. And by no stretch of the imagination do I, or does this committee, I think, judge the district or the level of education based upon MCAS scores. However, it's a requirement and it's something that we know is going to come up on the calendar. And if we have to do it, we might as well try to do a good job with it. But it doesn't represent what our students are accomplishing.
And there's an accountability system in the state that's going to kick back into place as well.
Right. So you're good on this topic? Consensus, excellent. All right, it's about 9 o'clock. This is our second opportunity for interested citizens. So brief pause to see if anyone wishes to speak. Okay, perfect. We'll move on to subcommittee reports. We've got a couple here. Some PMBC. Can you report this?
I don't think that I have anything to update. Rubin High School is being quoted out, I think, for getting more of the work done, and Shaker Lane Building Committee, we're trying to still get together. So yeah, I think
I did talk to MSBA today just to make sure that we didn't need to do anything else. And, reassured me that we don't have to do anything at this point. So I felt pretty comfortable after.
Yeah, they're trying to schedule us, I think, for an April board meeting with MSBA, so that's the next timeline with MSBA.
Okay, budget subcommittee. I can report that the budget subcommittee had a meeting this week. The focus was on special education cost center. We invited the CPAC group to attend the meeting. They were represented well. We went through the cost center, different line items. They asked a lot of good questions, and we had a really nice meeting. We've got trying to get a subsequent meeting on the calendar for the budget subcommittee as we get prepared for February 4th, which is a joint meeting between the school committee chair or representative, the select board, and the FinCom. And just I'm not available that day. Jen's also not available that day. It appears Brad's not available that day as well. So I'd be looking for potentially
February 9th.
February 4th. It's a Saturday.
Saturday at 10:30.
We can speak offline about it, but just looking for Stacy or Beano to hopefully help out that day. I can fill you in.
February 9th.
no, this is a different date. Yeah,
Stacy, it's gonna be you.
it's gonna be me.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, Stacy.
It's me.
Yeah, awesome. So,
We'll catch up.
Okay, that's something else.
so maybe we would we'll look to include you in on that meeting if we can.
Okay.
That just about does it for the budget subcommittee. Policy subcommittee,
We have some policies to consider for second reading.
let's hear them.
All right,
And Brad, sorry, I did put in JF, really, I guess, first reading. The only difference in JF from the current policy is we added the cross references to the policy that we're approving this evening. So there's a note at the bottom that will be taken out of there. It shouldn't have been in there to begin with.
great.
So I'm not sure what your wishes are as a school committee, do a first reading, second reading, or just do a first and second reading on that one, since there really no changes in the content, just
I think it's best practice to do it at two different meetings. Do first reading for this one now. So present to the committee for first reading, policy JF on school admissions. You've seen this, and it just explains this is what you have to do if you're a resident of town to get your kid in our schools. It's pretty straightforward and now we've added the right cross references. Or any comments about that? So then if we're going to move through with individual motions and move through, then I would move that we accept for first reading policy JF about school admissions.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Austin, seconded by Ms. Patel. All those in favor, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes for first reading.
And then wait for second reading, I think these three policies, is that correct?
Yes.
Three policies, JFABD, which we discussed last time. It's about homeless students, enrollment, rights, and services. It's just about the ways our district will work with students who are unhoused at the moment and making sure that we can support them in all really important ways. If you've read the policy, you've seen this, making sure they can enroll in the district and stay in the district if they're moving around from one place to another. Explains their rights and articulates how the district will have and does have a homeless liaison to work with the family and with appropriate services to make sure the students get the education they deserve. We introduced this last time for first reading. I put it before you again for second reading.
No questions from me.
Again, as noted, these policies come to us, the language comes to us from the state. MASC, so it's been vetted legally and everything. So then I would move that we approve for second reading the policy JFABD about homeless students enrollment rights and services.
Motion made. Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Austin, seconded by Ms. Patel. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right, the next one that we're considering on second reading is JFABE for educational opportunities for military children. Again, I think this policy is really well written. It just explains that we'll do our best to make sure that students who move to our district because of military deployment or who have to leave our district for military deployment get all the things they deserve. If they're in an honors class before they get an honors class here, that we will support them. We will do our best to get their records. If we don't have everything right at the start, we'll waive some things and make it work so they can get their education as soon as possible. You've read this. I submit any questions or comments about it, or I think it's a really straightforward good policy. I move that we approve policy JFABE, educational opportunities for military children.
Motion made. Do I have a second?
Second.
Perfect. Motion made by Mr. Austin, seconded by Ms. Patel. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Motion passes.
And finally, the last policy I'm putting for the committee, or we're putting for the committee, is for second reading and therefore vote, is JFABF, educational opportunities for children in foster care. Again, this I invite people who haven't read it to read it. It talks about how the state and the district will determine best interest. The goal here is to support children in foster care and have a continuity of education. If they move out of district, they want to stay in our district, we'll help them. If they're coming into our district and want to be in our district, we'll support them there. And again, it explains how this works, working with other state agencies. We've all had 2 weeks to read it. We've thought about it before. Any questions or comments about this one? Again, so then I move that we approve policy JFABF, educational opportunities for children in foster care.
Motion made. Do I have a second?
Second.
Perfect. Motion made by Mr. Austin, seconded by Ms. Patel. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Motion passes. Thank you very much. Scanning real quick to see if there's anything.
CPAC. Can I just say one
CPAC,
thing?
you give us an update, sure.
Just an update is that CPAC helped lead to and worked with Lynn Snow's office and a lot of really talented professionals to have, like we talked before, a great session on anxiety last week. I invited the community to contact us for resources, which were really helpful and to go if we have other sessions like this. Also, I'll take just a moment to thank outgoing chair Osa, who did so much to make that session happen. Who's been a fierce advocate for our students, for our families. She is not going to continue as president, co-president of the CPAC, but we should thank her. She did a great job and helped get CPAC off the ground, and was a really strong advocate for families. So I want to say as a member of CPAC, how much I appreciate her leadership.
I echo that. I think she made an effort to meet with all of us individually and talk about CPAC, and I just learned a lot more just by her her willingness to help out. So I echo that entirely.
I would like to speak.
Go ahead, Len.
I echo both of those sentiments. I thank OSA so much. Also, we will be posting all of the materials and resources, or CPAC will be posting all of the materials and resources from the workshop on their Facebook page as soon as I send them all to them. I just haven't done that, but they will be shared tomorrow so that they can be posted. So all parents will be able to access the materials in the slide deck.
And I thank you, Lynn. I'd also just like to say we're so fortunate to have Ann Neary as the continuing president of CPAC, who again helped organize the thing on Tuesday night, I guess. And we're strong. We have strong CPAC. I think that serves the district really well.
Agreed.
Oh, can I say one more thing? We do have the TFM parent orientation meeting coming up on the 17th. Was that mentioned?
It was not.
Okay, so at 7 o'clock, the Littleton Public Schools TFM parent orientation is a meeting. It is virtual. There is a Zoom link. CPAC is sharing it out. It's also posted on the website, the LPS website as well. And the principals have been sharing it out in their weekly newsletters. But the best way to get it would be to go onto the Student Services website or the CPAC social media pages to get the link for the Zoom.
Great, thank you. We do have a need for an executive session, so I'll entertain that motion just a quick second, but just wanted to announce that our next meeting is January 26th, same time, same place. Everybody else set?
We are.
Good.
So I'll move to adjourn at 9:05 to go to executive session for the purpose of contract negotiation session with no intention to return to open session.
Motion's been made. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, motion made by Mr. Austin, second by Mr. Marius. It is a roll call vote. Mr. Austin,
Brad Austin votes yes.
Mr. Powell,
Bino Patel, yes.
Mr. Marius,
Susan Harris, yeah.
Ms. Gold.
Jen Gold, yes.
All right, Justin McCarthy votes yes as well. All right, that'll do it for the school committee meeting. We will reconfigure.